Divorced women who filed papers. First, how did you react when he thanked you for it? Story 1. I filed first on a Tuesday morning because I couldn't take another "we'll talk later" that never turned into a talk. 12 years together, and somehow every hard conversation ended with him washing a mug and pretending life was fine. I printed the papers at work, my hands shaking so bad I jammed the copier twice. I told myself I was being brave. Truth was, I was terrified. When I handed him the envelope, he didn't even open it right away. He just sat at the kitchen table like someone had unplugged him. I expected pleading, rage, the dramatic speech he'd never once given me. Instead, he looked up and said, "Thank you." I laughed because I thought it was sarcasm. "For ruining your life?" He rubbed his eyes. "For stopping the slow death. I've been relieved and ashamed about it for years." That word, relieved, hit like a slap. I'd been carrying the guilt alone, thinking I was the villain who quit. Then he slid the envelope back toward me and asked, "Quiet, can we do this clean?" It felt unfair that he got gratitude while I got grief. That night I cried in the shower. Not because I missed him, but because I realized how long I'd been begging for a sign he saw me. And now, the first honest sentence he'd said in years was a thank you for leaving. 2 weeks later, we met our lawyers. He showed up with folders organized, a list of assets, and a note on top. No fighting. No punishment. I stared at it like it was a trick. After the hearing, he walked me to my car and said, "You gave me my life back. I'm sorry I made you the only adult in the room." I drove away furious, grateful, hollow. Every emotion at once. The strangest part was this. The thank you didn't make me doubt filing. It confirmed I should have done it sooner. Story 2. I filed first because I caught him rehearsing a lie in the mirror. Not cheating. Not money. Just practicing how to sound concerned while telling me my feelings were too intense, like he was preparing for a deposition in our living room. That was the moment I realized our marriage was a performance and I was the only one not reading the script. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't threaten. I just went to a mediator, paid the fee, and filed. When the server handed him the papers at his office, he came home early for the first time in months. He walked in calm, almost polite, and I braced myself for war. He put his keys down and said, "I owe you a thank you." My mouth opened and nothing came out. He continued, "I was going to drag this out. Not because I wanted you, because I didn't want to lose. You filing first, it snapped me out of it." I stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "So you were going to punish me for leaving a marriage you also didn't want?" He didn't deny it. That honesty should have felt satisfying. It didn't. It made my stomach turn. Then he did something worse. He started being reasonable. He offered the house split I'd asked for years ago. He volunteered to take the debt tied to his business. He even suggested we keep the dog schedule consistent, so she doesn't feel abandoned. I wanted to scream. Where was this version when I was begging you to show up? At mediation, he looked the mediator in the eye and said, "She's done enough emotional labor. I'm not making her carry the divorce too." The mediator smiled at me like I'd won some prize. But in the parking lot afterward, I finally said it. "Your thank you doesn't erase what you put me through." He nodded. "I know. It's not for forgiveness. It's for the fact that you didn't let me turn you into a bitter person." That line followed me for weeks. I expected divorce to be him blaming me. Instead, he thanked me like I'd pulled a plug on a machine that was slowly burning us both alive. And I hated that he was right. Story 3. Everyone told me not to file first. Let him be the bad guy. Make him admit it. Don't give him control of the narrative. But I didn't file for a narrative. I filed because one night our daughter asked, "Is Dad mad at you again?" Like it was weather. Like tension was just the season in our house. I filed on a Friday, took the kids to my sister's for the weekend, and turned off my phone. When I turned it back on, I had 17 missed calls. I thought it would be rage. It wasn't. His first text said, "Can we talk?" The second said, "I'm sorry." The third said, "Thank you." When he finally came by, he looked wrecked. Not angry. Wrecked like someone who'd been pretending they were fine and got caught. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," he admitted. "That's the problem," I said. "You didn't think I would protect myself." He swallowed hard. "I'm thanking you because you did what I couldn't. I've been miserable for a long time and I kept thinking if I just stayed quiet it would magically get better." I waited for the but, the twist, the blame. Instead, he looked at the floor and said, "You saved the kids from growing up thinking this is love." I wanted to hate him for saying something so accurate so late. I wanted to throw it back in his face. But my chest cracked open because it was the first time he'd named the real stakes. The divorce wasn't clean. There were tears, arguments about holidays, a brutal conversation about child support where he flinched every time I said numbers. But he never once tried to punish me. At the final hearing, as we left the courthouse, he stopped me at the stairs. "I know thanking you sounds insane," he said, voice tight. But thank you for not letting me keep us trapped. That night, I told my daughter, Mom and Dad are going to live in different houses, but we're going to be okay. She nodded like she already knew. And for the first time in years, okay felt possible. Story 4. My husband was the type who said he didn't believe in divorce, as if belief prevented paperwork. After every fight, he'd go cold and wait me out. Weeks of silence. Then one day he'd buy groceries and act like the marriage reset button had been pressed. I lived inside a loop. He lived inside denial. So when I filed, I did it quietly. No dramatic announcement, no suitcase on the porch. I booked an appointment, signed my name, and felt weirdly calm, like stepping off a treadmill after running for years. He found out when the notification hit his email. He came into the bedroom holding his laptop, face pale, and said, "Is this real?" Yes. He sat on the edge of the bed and started laughing. Soft at first. Then like he couldn't stop. My stomach dropped. I thought he'd finally snapped. Then he looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "Thank you." I blinked. "You're happy?" He nodded, wiping his face like he was embarrassed. "I've been wanting out. I just couldn't be the one to do it. My family would have destroyed me. I kept hoping you'd get fed up so I could tell myself I didn't quit." That confession made my hands go numb. "So you tortured me with silence because you needed me to carry the blame?" He didn't argue. He just said, "Yes, and I hate myself for it." I expected that to be the end. His neat little closure. But then he did something I didn't see coming. He told his family the truth. At Sunday dinner, he looked his mother in the face and said, "Don't you dare call her selfish. I've been checked out for years. She filed because I wouldn't." His mom stared at me like she'd never seen me before. His dad said nothing. The room felt like a courtroom where the verdict flipped mid-trial. On the drive home, he whispered, "I'm still grateful. Not because divorce is easy. Because you finally forced me to stop pretending I'm a good man just because I stayed." I didn't forgive him. Gratitude doesn't undo damage. But hearing him thank me and then own it publicly was the first time I felt like I wasn't crazy for wanting peace. Story 5. I filed first as a power move. And I'm not proud of it. I was angry. Angry at his "I need space" that lasted months. Angry at his sudden gym obsession. Angry at how he'd look through me like I was part of the furniture. So I filed before he could. I wanted to be the one who ended it. The one who didn't get abandoned. When he got served, he called me immediately. I answered, ready for a fight. He said, "Thank you." I literally checked the caller ID to make sure it was him. "Why are you thanking me?" I demanded. He exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. Because I was scared. I kept thinking, if I leave, I'm the villain. If you leave, I can finally stop lying to everyone that we're fine. His thank you didn't feel like gratitude. It felt like he'd escaped consequences. So I went full cold. I told him we'd communicate through attorneys. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't give him the satisfaction. But then, in the middle of the process, I got sick. Not hospital sick, life stops sick. Fever, body aches, unable to drive. Our mutual friends were busy. My family lived out of state. He showed up with groceries and medicine and left them on my porch. No speech. No guilt trip. Just a text. "I'm not here to blur lines. I'm here because you're human." At mediation, when my lawyer pushed for something aggressive, he shook his head. "No. She didn't deserve this marriage, but she doesn't deserve to be punished for ending it." I hated that I started to respect him again, right when it didn't matter. The day the divorce finalized, he asked if we could talk for 5 minutes. We stood outside the courthouse like strangers. "I know you filed first to win," he said gently, not accusatory. "And I'm still thanking you. Because winning is what finally ended the competition we turned our marriage into." I wanted to tell him he didn't get to be wise now. I wanted to spit back every lonely night, every humiliating silence. Instead, I just nodded, got in my car, and sat there shaking. Not from sadness, but from the brutal clarity that sometimes the person who hurt you can still be honest at the end. And that honesty doesn't heal you. It just makes the truth impossible to avoid. Story 6. I filed first because I was tired of waiting for him to admit what everyone else already saw. He hadn't touched me in a year, hadn't asked about my day in months, and every date night ended with him scrolling in silence while I pretended the restaurant music was loud enough to fill the emptiness. When the papers were ready, I didn't feel brave. I felt cold. Like I'd already mourned him and now I was just doing admin. He read the first page, blinked twice, and said, "Thank you." I snapped. "Don't do that. Don't try to make this cute." He shook his head. "It's not cute. It's relief. I've been living like a coward. You just did the thing I couldn't." "Couldn't or wouldn't?" I asked. He swallowed. "Wouldn't. Because then I'd have to admit I failed." That hit harder than anger. Failure was a word he could say. Love was not. 2 days later, his sister called me crying. "He told us you filed." And he told Mom not to blame you. He said he checked out years ago and you deserved someone who actually shows up. I sat on my kitchen floor holding the phone, stunned. Not because it redeemed him, because it proved he understood the damage the whole time. At mediation, he pushed for a clean split. No petty arguments, no dragging my name, no sudden claims on things he'd never cared about. The mediator looked at us and said, "This is unusually respectful." He glanced at me and said, "She carried this marriage. I'm not making her carry the divorce." In the parking lot afterward, I finally let it out. "You don't get to thank me like I did you a favor." He nodded. "You didn't do me a favor. You stopped us from rotting. And I'm grateful even if I don't deserve to be." I drove home furious that the most honest thing he ever gave me was gratitude for leaving. But I also felt something I hadn't felt in years. Space to breathe. Story 7. I filed first out of pure survival. He wasn't violent. He was worse in a quieter way. He turned everything into a debate I could never win. My memories were wrong, my feelings were dramatic, and his neglect was always stress from work. Every conversation ended with me apologizing for needing anything. When I handed him the papers, I expected the courtroom version of him to appear. Calm, strategic, charming. Instead, he sat down and whispered, "Thank you." I stared. "For what?" "For ending the gaslighting contest," he said, surprisingly blunt. "I've been treating this like a game. And you finally walked off the field." My throat tightened. "So you knew?" He nodded once. "I knew. I just thought I could keep you confused long enough that you'd never leave." That honesty made me nauseous. But it also did something else. It snapped the spell. It was like hearing the magician explain the trick. He didn't fight the divorce. He didn't smear me. He didn't try to twist mutual friends. He simply stopped performing. At the first attorney meeting, my lawyer prepared for battle. He came in with a signed proposal that gave me more than I asked for. My lawyer blinked at me like, "Is this real?" Afterward in the hallway, he said quietly, "I'm not apologizing. I'm not good at that. But I can at least not ruin your future." I should have felt victory. Instead, I felt grief for the years I spent questioning my own mind. The day the decree came through, he emailed one line, "Thank you for choosing yourself. I didn't think you would." And for the first time, his words didn't hook into me. They just sat there on the screen, exposing what he'd been all along. Someone who needed me small to feel big. I closed the laptop, made tea, and realized the best revenge wasn't proving him wrong. It was not caring if he ever admitted it again. Story 8. I filed first because I couldn't stand being called controlling for trying to keep the lights on. He'd quit jobs impulsively, started business ideas that never left the notebook, and somehow it always became my fault when rent was due. "You're stressing me out," he'd say, while I worked overtime and ate cereal for dinner so we could afford his dreams. The day I filed, he looked at the papers like they were written in another language. Then he smiled, actually smiled, and said, "Thank you." I felt my face burn. "Are you serious right now?" "Yes," he said softly. "Because now I don't have to pretend I'm going to change." That was the cruelest compliment I'd ever received. He added, "You're going to be okay. You're built for okay." Me? I keep dragging you into my chaos. I wanted to scream at him for how calm he sounded, like he was freeing a hostage and expecting applause. But then something shifted. Over the next weeks, he cooperated with everything. Documents, bank statements, debt lists. He didn't hide money. He didn't sabotage. He even offered to take the credit card balance because, in his words, that was my mess. At the hearing, the judge asked if we understood the terms. He said, "Yes, Your Honor. She's been financing my denial for years. I'm not asking her to do it anymore." After court, I stood outside shaking, not from fear, because I'd spent years thinking I was crazy for wanting stability, and now the person who accused me of being too much was thanking me for leaving him behind. He walked away, turned once and said, "I hope you buy a couch you actually like." It was such a small line, but it gutted me, because it sounded like he finally saw me as a person, right when he lost the right to be near me. Story 9. I filed first after I found the therapy notes he hid in his car. Not his notes, ours. He'd gone to a counselor alone and told me he was just working late. In the notes, the therapist wrote, "Client describes marriage as safe, but admits he has emotionally left. Feels guilty. Avoids confrontation." So he knew. He just didn't want to be the one to say it out loud to my face. When I confronted him, I didn't yell. I simply said, "I filed." He stared at me for a long time, then exhaled like he'd been underwater. "Thank you," I laughed sharply. "You're welcome for discovering you've been grieving our marriage in secret." He flinched, but didn't deny it. I couldn't do it. I kept thinking if I waited long enough, you'd stop loving me and then it wouldn't hurt as much. That made something inside me go quiet. "So you were waiting for me to die emotionally?" He nodded, shame all over his face. "Yes." What shocked me wasn't the confession. It was what happened next. He called my dad himself. He told our closest friends he didn't want a smear campaign. He offered to move out immediately so I could keep the routine. He did every hard logistical thing I begged him to do during the marriage. At mediation, he slid a handwritten note across the table. No retaliation. No delays. No cruelty. My lawyer raised an eyebrow. I stared at it until my vision blurred. After everything was signed, we sat in the car outside the office because neither of us wanted to walk out first. He said, "You didn't just file first. You stopped me from turning into a man who resents you for making me face myself." I looked at him and said, "You already did resent me. I just refused to carry it anymore." He nodded. "Fair." Then he got out, closed the door gently, and left me there with the strangest mix of pain and freedom. Like the marriage finally admitted it was over, and my body could stop bracing for impact. Story 10. I filed first because his gratitude had already started, before the papers. Every time I brought up divorce, he'd get this look, like I'd offered him a life raft and insulted him at the same time. "Don't say that," he'd whisper. "I'm trying." But his trying looked like disappearing into work, sleeping on the couch, and calling me roommate as a joke that wasn't really a joke. The night I told him I'd scheduled a consultation, he sat at the counter and said, "Part of me is relieved." I didn't sleep that night. So when I finally filed, I expected him to pretend he was blindsided. I expected him to tell people I was sudden and cold. Instead, he brought me coffee the next morning, set it on the table, and said, "Thank you for being the one with the spine." I stared at the cup like it might explode. "You don't get to thank me for ending the marriage you starved." He nodded slowly. "I know. I'm not asking for comfort. I'm acknowledging you did what I kept avoiding because I didn't want to be hated." "By who?" I asked. He looked down. "By myself." That line haunted me, because it was the first time he admitted the enemy wasn't me. It was his own cowardice. The divorce wasn't easy, but it was oddly respectful. He refused to fight over furniture. He didn't argue about splitting savings. He even corrected his mother when she tried to call me ungrateful. He said, "Stop. She gave me years I didn't earn." On the day we signed the final papers, he paused, pen hovering, and said quietly, "You're going to feel lighter. And I'm sorry you had to do the heavy part alone." I didn't cry until later, in the car, because grief hit me like a delayed wave. Not grief for losing him. Grief for how close we came to being something real if he'd shown up sooner. But he didn't. So I did. And his thank you, weird as it was, became the proof I needed that filing first wasn't cruelty. It was mercy, for both of us. Story 11. I filed first because I got tired of being the only person afraid. Afraid of the silence after fights, afraid of his sudden sweet phases that always followed cruelty, afraid of how fast he could turn a simple request into a character assassination. I didn't think he'd hit me. I thought he'd erase me. When the papers arrived, he sat on the couch, read them carefully, and then, like he was choosing each word, said, "Thank you." I froze. "For what? For humiliating you?" He shook his head. "For ending the hostage situation." My stomach clenched. "You think you're the hostage?" "No," he said, voice flat. "You are. I've been keeping you in this marriage because it benefits me. Image, routine, someone to blame. You filing means I can't keep pretending I'm trying while doing nothing." That was the first time he admitted the truth without dressing it up. I expected the backlash to come later. Lawyers, lies, a smear campaign. But instead, he did something that terrified me more than anger. He stayed calm, cooperative, almost respectful, like he'd finally stopped playing the role of husband and moved on to the role of reasonable ex. At mediation, he offered a clean settlement. He signed quickly. The mediator said, "You two are handling this well." I almost laughed. Handling it well would have been him acting like a partner before paperwork. Outside the office, he said, "I know my thank you sounds sick, but you forced consequences into my life. I don't get to dodge them anymore." I looked at him and said, "You're right. You don't." That night, I realized his gratitude wasn't kindness. It was resignation. And for the first time, resignation felt safer than hope. Story 12. I filed first after he gave me an anniversary card with the wrong name. Not another woman's name. His ex-wife's name. Like my role in his life was so interchangeable, he couldn't even proofread his affection. When I confronted him, he laughed it off. "It's just a brain slip." But it wasn't. It was a summary. I filed a week later. When he got served, he called me and said, "Thank you," like I just paid a bill for him. I said, "Do not say that." He sighed. "I mean it. I've been living in limbo. I didn't want to be married, but I didn't want to be alone. You filing first means I don't have to admit I used you as a buffer." There it was. No flowers, no apology, just confession. We met to discuss logistics at a coffee shop, and he surprised me again. He handed me a list. What he'd take, what he'd leave, and a plan for splitting the dog's vet records and microchip info. He'd even written, "I won't fight you on the savings. It's yours." "You're making this easy," I said, suspicious. He stared into his cup. "I made the marriage hard. Least I can do is make the divorce clean." The words should have comforted me. Instead, they made my throat burn. Because the competence was always there. The consideration was always possible. He just didn't value me enough to use it when it mattered. When we signed, he murmured, "Thank you for cutting the cord." I didn't respond. I just walked out and felt something unfamiliar. No adrenaline, no dread, just quiet. And quiet, for once, didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. Story 13. I filed first because my mother called me and asked, "Are you okay?" And I lied automatically. That's when I realized lying had become my second language. He wasn't screaming every day. He wasn't cheating openly. He was just absent in a way that made me feel stupid for needing anything. Birthdays forgotten, funerals skipped, promises made and accidentally broken. The marriage had turned into me managing disappointment like a household chore. I filed without warning because any warning would have become a negotiation. And I was done negotiating for basic respect. When I told him, he sat down slowly and said, "Thank you." I blinked. "You're thanking me for divorcing you?" He nodded. I didn't want to be the one to do it. I kept thinking if I stayed, I was a good guy. But staying while you're miserable isn't goodness. It's laziness. That line stunned me because it sounded like something a mature adult would say. I didn't recognize him. Then he added, "You're going to hate me for this, but you filing first is the kindest thing you've done for yourself in years." I did hate him. Not for the compliment, for the timing. He could see me clearly now, at the exact moment he no longer had to show up. The process was surprisingly smooth. He didn't argue about money. He didn't threaten. He didn't try to win friends. He just complied, like he'd been waiting for the curtain to drop. On the day it finalized, he texted, "Thank you for not letting this turn ugly." I would have. That last part was what made me tremble. Because it proved something I'd suspected. If I'd stayed longer, I wouldn't have just been unhappy. I would have become someone I didn't recognize. Bitter, reactive, trapped. So his thank you didn't flatter me. It warned me. And I listened. Story 14. I filed first because he kept calling me dramatic whenever I asked for accountability. The final straw was a small thing. I found a hidden bank account. Not full of millions. Just enough to tell me he'd been quietly planning an exit while telling me I was paranoid for feeling distance. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He said, I needed options. So I gave him one. I filed the next day. He read the papers, leaned back and said, "Thank you." My hands clenched. "You're welcome for exposing you?" "No," he said, calm. "Thank you for beating me to it." That sentence lit me on fire. "So this was a race?" He nodded. "Yeah, and you won. And honestly, I'm glad. I was going to do it in a way that made you look unstable. I wanted to protect myself." I stared at him, stunned. By destroying me, he looked ashamed but not surprised. Yes, he didn't fight the settlement. He offered to split things evenly, maybe to ease his guilt or maybe because he realized I now had evidence of his planning. Either way, he stayed cooperative. But the real shock came when his brother called me later and said, "He told us you filed and he deserved it. He said you caught him trying to set you up." I sat there shaking. Not because it fixed anything. Because it confirmed how close I came to being the crazy ex in a story he wrote first. At the final signing, he slid the pen toward me and said softly, "Thank you for not letting me turn you into my villain." I looked him dead in the eye. "I didn't do this for you. I did it because I refused to be someone's cautionary tale, and that was the first time in our entire marriage I spoke without fear of his reaction." Story 15. I filed first because he tried to compliment me and accidentally told the truth. We were at a friend's barbecue and someone joked, "You two are the perfect couple." He smiled and said, "She makes everything easy." Everyone laughed like it was sweet. But I heard what he meant. I make him easy. I absorb stress. I smooth conflicts. I forgive. I adjust. I shrink. That night I asked, "Do you ever make things easy for me?" He stared like the question was in another language. Then he said, "I don't know how." So I filed. When he got the papers, he didn't cry. He didn't argue. He said, "Thank you," in this raw, almost relieved voice that made my skin prickle. I scoffed. "Thank you for ending a marriage you didn't participate in?" He nodded. "Yes, because you're right. You've been carrying me, and I've been letting you because it felt good to be taken care of." There was no excuse. No dramatic reason. Just a man admitting he'd gotten comfortable being selfish. During the divorce, he surprised me by actually being considerate. He offered me the better furniture because you picked it. He agreed to a fair split without haggling. He even apologized once, quietly, not performatively. At the courthouse steps after it was final, he said, "You're going to thrive without me. And I'm grateful you didn't wait until you hated me." I wanted to tell him I'd already hated parts of him. That I'd hated the way he slept peacefully while I stayed awake wondering how to fix us. But instead I said, "Your gratitude doesn't change what happened." He nodded. "I know. It just means I finally see it." And as I walked away, I realized seeing it late wasn't my tragedy anymore. It was his. Story 16. I filed first because he started acting like the divorce was already done. He just wanted me to do the paperwork. He'd moved into the guest room, stopped wearing his ring, and began introducing me at parties as my kid's mom, like I was a coworker. When I asked what we were doing, he'd shrug and say, "Let's not make it a thing." So I made it a thing. When he saw the petition, he let out a long breath and said, "Thank you." I laughed, bitter. "For finally forcing you to say the quiet part out loud? For making me choose a life," he said. "I've been living in the hallway between doors. You just shut one." I waited for him to blame me. He didn't. He just looked embarrassed, like he'd been caught stalling for years. The next week, his mother called me and started in with, "How could you?" and then stopped. "He told us," she said, voice flat. "He said he's been checked out. He said not to punish you." That was when I realized his gratitude wasn't affection. It was surrender. The marriage had been on life support, and I was the only one still pretending I could revive it. At mediation, he asked for almost nothing. When my attorney whispered, "This is unusually straightforward," I felt a flash of rage. Straightforward now, when it's too late to matter. After everything was signed, he said, "I'm sorry you had to be the bad guy." I replied, "I'm not the bad guy. I'm the only one who stopped lying." He didn't argue. He just nodded. And for the first time, I walked out of a conversation with him without feeling like I needed to translate reality into something he could tolerate. Story 17. I filed first because he kept joking about how I'd never leave. He'd say it at dinner parties, smiling. "She threatens divorce every year. She loves me too much." People would laugh, and I'd laugh too, because correcting him would create a scene. But inside, something in me hardened each time. He wasn't teasing. He was counting on my loyalty like it was a leash. When I served him the papers, he stared at them and said, "Wow." I crossed my arms, ready for the explosion. He didn't explode. He smiled sadly and said, "Thank you." My stomach dropped. "You're thanking me because you think I'm proving you right? Like I'm dramatic?" "No," he said. "Thank you because I finally got scared." "What?" He looked down. "I've been disrespectful because I thought you'd stay. You filing first is the first real consequence I've had in years." I wanted to hate him for making it about his personal growth. But then he did something that felt like an apology in action. He stopped performing. He told our friends, "Don't make her the villain." He called his brother and admitted he'd treated me like a certainty instead of a person. He didn't ask for sympathy. In mediation, he accepted terms quickly. When his lawyer tried to push for more, he interrupted, "No, I'm not punishing her for finally doing what I dared her to do." After it finalized, he said, "I'm grateful you didn't wait until you despised me. I earned your exit a long time ago." That sentence stayed with me. Not because it softened me, because it validated what I'd felt. I wasn't leaving too early. I was leaving late, after giving him far more chances than he deserved. Story 18. I filed first because I found a folder on his computer labeled Post-Divorce. Inside were apartment listings, a budget, and a spreadsheet of how much he thought I'd ask for, like I was a problem he could estimate. When I confronted him, he didn't even look ashamed. He said, "I was planning. That's responsible." I filed within a week. When he received the papers, he sat down and said quietly, "Thank you." I stared at him. "You planned for divorce behind my back and you're thanking me?" He nodded. "Because now I don't have to keep acting like I'm still deciding. I've wanted out for a while." My hands trembled. "Then why didn't you just leave?" He finally met my eyes. "Because leaving makes you the villain. Getting served makes you the victim." There it was. The real reason. The rage I felt was sharp and clean. Not messy heartbreak. Clarity. I expected him to weaponize that folder, to start playing games with money and custody. Instead, he did the opposite. He offered a fair split immediately, probably because he knew I'd seen his calculations and he didn't want them in court. But what shocked me was his consistency. He didn't backslide into charm. He didn't beg. He didn't punish. He simply cooperated like a man finishing a project he started. At the final hearing, outside the courthouse, he said, "I know thanking you sounds insane, but you took away my ability to stall and manipulate the timeline." I replied, "You're welcome for saving myself from your strategy." He flinched, and for the first time, he looked like someone had finally lost control of the story. And I realized that was why his gratitude sounded like relief. I'd cut the strings. Story 19. I filed first because he thanked me before the papers ever existed. He just didn't call it that. Every time I brought up our problems, he'd say, "You deserve better." in this soft voice like it was romantic. But it wasn't romance. It was surrender dressed as kindness. A way to avoid changing while still sounding noble. One night I said, "If you believe I deserve better, why are you still here?" He stared at the wall and whispered, "Because I don't want to be alone." So I filed. When he got served, he didn't fight. He sat with his hands folded and said, "Thank you." My eyes burned. "Stop saying that like you're being mature. You stayed because you were comfortable." He nodded. "I know. And you filing is you choosing yourself. I'm grateful you finally did." That made me furious in a new way. "So you could watch me suffer for years, but the moment I save myself, you suddenly respect it?" He didn't have an answer. Just shame. During the divorce, he was unexpectedly gentle. He didn't drag out paperwork. He didn't argue over small things. He agreed to the settlement quickly. Our friends kept saying, "At least he's being civil." Civil. Like that was the bar. At the signing, he slid a small envelope across the table. Inside was a letter. Not a love letter. A responsibility letter. He wrote that he'd used my compassion as a cushion, that he'd let me be the strong one so he could avoid adulthood. The last line said, "Thank you for removing the safety net I didn't deserve." I read it twice, then put it down. It didn't heal me, but it did something important. It confirmed I wasn't imagining the imbalance. He knew. He always knew. And now, for the first time, he was forced to live without my patience propping him up. Story 20. I filed first because I was tired of being married to an apology. Not a person. An apology. Every fight ended with him saying, "I'm sorry you feel that way," then changing nothing. It was like our marriage was a looped audio clip. Apology, calm, repeat. The day I filed, I didn't cry. I felt numb, which scared me more than sadness. Numb meant I was done. When he opened the envelope, his shoulders dropped and he said, "Thank you." I let out a laugh that sounded ugly. "For what? For finally getting rid of me?" "No," he said quickly. "For forcing honesty. I've been pretending I can be the husband you need. I can't. And instead of admitting that, I kept you in limbo." I stared at him, stunned by the directness. "So you wasted my years because you didn't want to look like the guy who quit?" He nodded. "Yes." The next month was surreal. He didn't retaliate. He didn't threaten to take everything. He didn't call me names. He just complied. He moved out without drama. He agreed to split assets fairly. When his friends asked what happened, he said, "She did what I should have done." At mediation, the mediator looked at me and said, "You seem surprised." I was. I'd prepared for war and he arrived with surrender. After the final hearing, he followed me outside and said, "I know gratitude isn't enough, but I need you to know I'm grateful you didn't let me keep lying to you." I looked at him and said, "I didn't do it to teach you. I did it because I wanted to live." He nodded, eyes wet. "Then I'm glad you chose that." And for the first time, his words didn't pull me back into the marriage. They just confirmed what I already knew. Leaving wasn't cruelty. Staying would have been. Story 21. I filed first because the day I realized I'd stopped recognizing myself, he said something that sounded like a warning. We were in the car after another date night, where he spent half the meal texting. I finally snapped, "Do you even want to be married to me?" He didn't look shocked. He looked tired. "I don't know," he said. "But I know you'll never leave." That sentence landed like a hand around my throat. Not because it was cruel, because it was confident. Like my loyalty was a guarantee he could exploit. I filed the next week. When he got the papers, he sat at the kitchen table and read them slowly. Then he whispered, "Thank you." I thought he was trying to be noble. "Don't you dare," I said. "Don't act like I'm doing you a favor." He shook his head. "I'm not being noble. I'm being honest. I've been leaning on your love like it was a crutch. And you taking it away is the first thing that's felt real in a long time." I stared at him, waiting for the manipulation, the twist, "but you're still wrong." It didn't come. Instead, he called his dad that night and told him, "Don't blame her. I've been coasting." His dad later texted me, "I'm sorry. You deserved better." At mediation, his lawyer tried to push for something petty, more of the savings, a weird argument about furniture value. He cut it off. "No. She's not paying for my pride." After the final hearing, he stood outside the courthouse and said, "I know I don't deserve to thank you, but thank you for refusing to be my safety net forever." Driving home, I realized the thank you didn't make me soft. It made me certain. He had always known what he was doing. I just finally stopped letting him. Story 22. I filed first because he started using my kindness as evidence that nothing was wrong. Every time I said, "I'm unhappy," he'd point to something I'd done for him. His laundry folded, his lunch packed, and say, "But you're still here. You're fine." Like my survival skills were a vote of confidence. When I filed, he didn't yell. He didn't accuse. He sat on the floor in the hallway, looked up at me, and said, "Thank you." I felt my face heat with anger. Stop. That's insulting. He blinked. I'm not trying to insult you. I'm trying to admit you were right. I've been treating your endurance like consent. That word, consent, hit me hard. Because that's exactly what it was. He'd mistaken my ability to cope for approval. He surprised me after that. He didn't call friends to rally them. He didn't post vague quotes online. He didn't make me the villain. He just complied, like he'd been waiting for me to stop enabling him. At our first mediation session, the mediator asked what we wanted. He said, I want her to leave this with dignity. I took enough from her already. I stared at him, almost dizzy. Where was this awareness when I begged you to change? He didn't dodge. I didn't want awareness then. Awareness would have required work. After it finalized, he left a voicemail. I'm grateful you did the hard thing first. I would have dragged this until you broke. I listened to it twice, shaking. Not because it was sweet, because it sounded like a confession to a crime I'd narrowly escaped. Story 23. I filed first because I was tired of being married to a man who kept promising he'd be better as soon as life calmed down. Life never calmed down. There was always work, a project, a deadline, a bad week. And somehow, I was expected to be patient forever. When I filed, he showed up at my apartment with red eyes and a stack of mail he'd forgotten to give me. He sat down, voice cracking, and said, "Thank you." I stared at him. "You're thanking me while crying?" He nodded. "Because it finally forced me to face the truth. I've been using chaos as an excuse to avoid being a husband. And you filing means you stopped waiting for the mythical version of me." That hurt in a way I didn't expect. I wanted to scream that the mythical version was the one he sold me. He didn't fight the divorce. He insisted we use a mediator. He offered a settlement that was fair without me having to demand it. When my attorney asked, "Why so cooperative?" he said, "Because she has already paid enough in time." The day we signed, he looked at me and said, "I know gratitude doesn't repair anything, but I'm grateful you ended the waiting room." I didn't forgive him, but I did feel something shift. The weight of all those years of maybe finally lifted. Because he admitted what I'd feared, that better later was just a way to keep me stuck. Story 24. I filed first because I caught myself rehearsing how to ask for basic respect without sounding mean. That's when I realized I'd been trained. Not by a monster, by a man who made every request feel like an accusation, every boundary feel like betrayal. When he received the papers, he called me and said, "Thank you." I actually thought he was mocking me. "Are you trying to humiliate me?" "No," he said, voice steady. "I'm trying to admit I've been exhausting you on purpose." Silence. He continued, "Whenever you asked for something, I made it hard. Not because you were unreasonable, because if I made you tired enough, you'd stop asking." My hands started shaking. "So you knew you were doing it?" "Yes," he said, "and you filing first means the tactic finally failed." I expected him to be defensive afterward. Instead, he became almost clinical. He sent documents on time. He responded to emails quickly. He didn't drag out negotiations, like he'd decided to be efficient now that the relationship was officially dead. At mediation, he said, "I don't want to punish her. I punished her for years by making love conditional." I sat there stunned. It was the first time he described our marriage in a way that matched my experience. After court, he said quietly, "Thank you for not letting me keep shrinking you." I replied, "You don't get credit for naming what you did." He nodded. "I know. I'm naming it because I can't hide from it anymore." And for the first time, I believed he wasn't thanking me to be kind. He was thanking me because I'd taken away his favorite tool, denial. Story 25. I filed first because he got a promotion and celebrated by acting like he no longer needed me. He stopped coming home on time. He started talking about networking like it excused everything. When I asked if there was someone else, he smiled and said, "You're being insecure. Don't ruin this for me." That night, I opened our shared calendar and saw he'd blocked off a weekend trip. Hotel, dinner reservations, the works. Under notes, he'd written her name, not mine. I didn't confront him. I filed. When he came home and saw the papers on the table, he went pale. Then, quietly, he said, "Thank you." I stared at him, disgusted. "You cheated and you're thanking me?" He swallowed. I was going to lie. I was going to spin it as we grew apart. "You filing first means I can't pretend I'm the victim of your insecurities." So the thank you wasn't remorse. It was acknowledgement that I'd blocked his exit strategy. He tried to be cooperative after that. Almost too cooperative. He agreed to the settlement quickly. He didn't contest anything. When his lawyer suggested pushing for more, he refused. "No," he said, "I already took enough." At the final hearing, he looked like a man attending his own sentencing. Outside, he said, "Thank you for not begging. If you'd begged, I would have used it." That sentence chilled me. I got in my car and drove away shaking. Not because I missed him, because I realized how close I came to being manipulated into staying, apologizing, and competing for my own marriage. His gratitude didn't soften the ending. It exposed the truth. Filing first didn't just end the relationship. It prevented him from rewriting it. Story 26. I filed first because our marriage had turned into customer service. He'd come home and list complaints like a manager. The house wasn't peaceful. I was too negative. Dinner was too late. If I cried, he'd sigh and say, "This is why I can't talk to you." Then he'd retreat to the garage and call it needing space, like I was a storm he had to wait out. One night he actually said, "You should be grateful. I don't cheat. I don't hit you. I'm a good husband." Something in me snapped. "That's the bare minimum," I said. He smirked like I'd proven his point. I filed the following week. When he saw the petition, he didn't rage. He leaned against the counter and said, "Thank you." I stared. "You're thanking me for divorcing you after you bragged about the bare minimum?" He nodded slowly. "Because now I don't have to keep trying to be good enough." "You're right. I've been doing the least. And you filing means I can stop pretending it's love." I expected him to become cruel when his ego got touched. Instead, he did something more unsettling. He became polite. He sent every document on time. He agreed to a fair split. He corrected his sister when she tried to call me ungrateful. "No," he said. I made her live on scraps. At mediation, he looked at the mediator and admitted, "I used the word grateful, like a leash." I wanted her to accept less and call it loyalty. I sat there shaking, half furious, half relieved. Because once he named it, I could finally trust my own memory again. Outside, he said, "I know my thank you doesn't fix anything. It's just the first honest sentence I've said in years." I didn't answer. I just walked away and felt my shoulders drop, like my body had been waiting for permission to stop apologizing for wanting love. Story 27. I filed first because I overheard him practicing his concerned husband voice on a phone call. About me. He was in the backyard telling his friend, "She's been unstable lately. I'm worried." I stood behind the curtain, listening to him gently paint me as fragile, like he was setting the stage for why our marriage would end, and none of it would be his fault. When he came inside, I asked, "Am I unstable?" He blinked. "What?" I said. "I heard you." He didn't apologize. He looked annoyed I'd interrupted the plan. That night, I contacted an attorney. I filed within 2 weeks. When he got served, he called me and said, "Thank you." My hands clenched so hard my nails dug into my palm. "You do not get to thank me," he sighed. "I'm thanking you because you're smarter than I thought. I assumed you'd panic and beg to work on it, and then I could keep controlling the narrative." I felt sick. "So you were pre-building a story where I'm crazy?" "Yes," he admitted, like he was discussing weather. "And you filing first means I can't play the long game." From that day on, he stayed oddly cooperative, not because he respected me, because he respected the fact I'd gotten ahead of him. At mediation, he agreed to a settlement fast. His lawyer looked surprised. He said, flat, "I don't want this in court." I smiled for the first time in months. Not because I was happy, because I was safe. After it finalized, he texted, "Thank you for ending it before it got ugly." I stared at the screen and whispered, "It already was." Then I blocked him and slept like someone who had been holding their breath for years.